Welcome to Colonie TV, the governmental educational channel for the town of Colonie.
Well, welcome to So Many Books, So Little Time. My name is Joe Nash. I'm here with Zina, Shevchik. We are both librarians here at the Colonie Library. This is show 31, Zina. Our premise is simple, if you've never seen it. Zina and I go down to the new bookshelf here in the library, and we go back to our technical services department, where all the new books are being processed. We get books, they come in the mail every day practically. And we're going to tell you about a lot of new books, all different kinds. So Zina, as usual, will go first.
All right. My first book is kind of a regional book, has a regional perspective. A North Country Life, Tales of Woodsmen, Waters, and Wildlife by Sidney Lee. And I don't know whether it's, his last name is spelled L-E-A, so I don't know if it's Leah or Lee. But it's got a beautiful picture of, it looks like a lake in the North Country. He is currently the poet laureate of Vermont, but a lot of his reminiscences are about his time in Maine, in northern Maine, as well as in Vermont. And he is, and has been his whole life, an avid hunter. The person who wrote the foreword in this book says, "Hunting pervades every aspect of Leah's life." And there's also a quote at the beginning here that says, his is a life addicted to the natural world. So he's recalling mentors in his life, most of whom have passed away before Mr. Leah wrote this book. And most of the accounting is of his time with these mentors in the woods, basically, on the lakes, hunting, fishing, canoeing. He is recalling these wonderful people who he says are disappearing, who have the skills to survive and live successfully in semi-wilderness, and who have a connection with the natural world that most of us will never have in our lives. And the book is broken up into seasons. The first season is cold times, which is winter. And so there are portraitures of people in his life who have dramatically affected his approach to life. So he's a poet, and he's an avid hunter and naturalist, and his writing is exquisite. And the people he highlights and he writes little vignettes about are fascinating as well. So, A North Country Life, Tales of Woodsmen, Waters, and Wildlife.
Okay, so it's a memoir of his.
It's a memoir, okay. But he's trying to pay homage, it's an homage to the people who have influenced him.
And he lives in
life.
Vermont, though.
He is a Vermonter,
right,
and he's a poet.
I know,
but there's very little poetry in here. It's mostly talking about life in the woods. There's a section. There's one part that talks about his trying to. Because I don't know the language of the outdoors of getting a trout, his battle with a real big trout, and how someone taught him how to reel in the trout and respect the life of the
Well, I was just wondering
fish.
because the cover, I know the Adirondacks they call the North Country. I wasn't sure if that was about.
Yes,
okay.
The North Country is
That's top section of Vermont, right?
Vermont and Maine.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
So my first book is a book I actually read. I mean, it came out in September, but it's still on the new bookshelf, so it qualifies. This is The Oath by Jeffrey Toobin. The subtitle is The Obama White House and the Supreme Court. Jeffrey Toobin is the New Yorker staff writer. He's on CNN a lot. I think he's on MSNBC a lot. He's a commentator. on legal affairs. He writes about the Supreme Court. His book, The Nine, was about the Rehnquist Court. Great book. This book is really good, and it's up to date if you're really interested in how the Supreme Court how they decided.
How they decided.
The Citizens United and the Obama health care. This book goes right up to all that. It has great behind-the-scenes goings-on. Jeffrey Toobin, he's got a lot of sources in there, including some of the judges. And a great writer. I don't know if you've read Jeffrey Toobin before, and everyone knows him. But this book is really very interesting. There's the backstory of a lot of the justices, a lot of things we didn't know about them. There's the two new ones, Sotomayor and Kagan, a lot about their confirmation hearing, very interesting. And to me, one of the heroes of the book, not John Roberts, but of course he did become a hero with the Obamacare, according to Jeffrey Toobin. He gives reasons why he decided the way he did, but you'll have to read it to find out. But
that's interesting too.
But the parts about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, I have to say, if you read this book, she's described as this petite, 5 foot tall, barely 100 pounds, but she really comes off as a giant. I mean, really.
Intellectual giant, right?
Parts about her are very fascinating. So, a great book. And it's the kind of book, I'm usually reading 3 or 4 books at once, and you go back and forth. I read through this like 3 or 4 straight nights. It was really very interesting. So The Oath by Jeffrey Toobin, the Obama White House and the Supreme Court, right up to date.
Well, it's interesting, any of those books about the Supreme Court,
Yes.
because we think of it as a sacrosanct institution.
Oh, I've read many books on the Supreme Court. It's a fascinating institution. Really.
How they work with each other, the maneuvering, but it's subtle maneuvering because they all think of themselves as intellectuals, and so
it's way more political than
most
people think.
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't know. Maybe it's opening the door to the last bit of sainthood with heroes.
Then my wife read it. She couldn't put it down either. It was really very, very good book.
For good or bad?
No,
No, I just discovered this writer, Joe, in discussions before we started to tape. He apparently knows this essayist.
A little bit about her.
Katie Roiphe, R-O-I-P-H-E. I have no idea how you pronounce it. She's a professor at New York University, NYU. She writes columns on life, literature, and politics for a variety of magazines, online and in print. And she's kind of an iconoclast, and she's, this is a book of essays. Apparently most of them, if not all of them, have been published previously in some of those publications I just mentioned, the magazines and journals. So I'm thrilled that I just discovered her. This book is called In Praise of Messy Lives, book of essays. The motivation to put this collection together began with a suggestion by an editor or someone else in the literary field she knows who asked her to look into the popularity of the series Mad Men that apparently has a huge popular following. And for those of you who don't know what Mad Men is, it's about the advertising, it's about the culture in the 1950s in the advertising circles in New York City. I think it
goes into the 60s too.
And it's in the 50s and early 60s. And the men who controlled the corporate world then, and the cigarette smoking, hard drinking, carousing world then, where women were seated at their typewriters in their, I'll say, high heels and stockings and form-fitting clothes with very little freedom in the corporate world. And she started this collection with that idea, but so in praise of messy lives, she calls the way those men and people lived then, that she describes them as living messy lives. And so she has organized this book into several sections. The first section is mostly about her own messy life. She's divorced, she's a single mother, how some people disapprove of the way she lives her life. The middle section is kind of a literary criticism. She comments on different aspects of 20th century literature. One essay is specifically on male novelists of the 20th century and how they have written sex scenes versus how contemporary writers approach sexual relationships. It's not, but that sounds very risque, and it's not at all. She delves into Facebook, the internet. She talks about
50 Shades of Grey.
She talks about 50 Shades of Grey. So, and that section is called The Way We Live Now, I believe. And she's talking about, back to Mad Men, about how we liked some of those books and those TV shows because our society, our culture, American society, is so buttoned up right now in the sense of we're health conscious, fitness conscious, and we're all about productivity. And so when we're watching other people live what she calls messy lives, we're fascinated. So her writing is fantastic. It's amusing. I know she's very controversial, Joe.
Well, whenever
himself.
she's one of those people that she'll write a piece in the New York Times or on the web Slate or whatever the
Slate
popular,
is one of them.
And then like the term they use is, you know, she writes something and then the blogosphere explodes with indignation. And
excellent writer, though.
she's a good writer.
I mean,
and
very, very.
that book got good reviews.
Really funny.
Okay. Well, now Zina, this is a book. I'll have one of my usual quizzes for you.
Oh no.
Now, I think it's safe to say we all know probably the most famous, most popular, the godfather of true crime is In Cold Blood by Truman Capote.
Okay.
I think most people would agree with
that.
you.
Okay.
Now,
Yeah.
this is my question though. In your 25 years or so as a librarian, what would you say is the second most famous, most popular, maybe the second
The California murders.
the second godfather of true crime? What would you say?
Oh, the author?
No, the book.
Oh, the book. The one about the Roman Polanski's wife's murder.
Oh, I forgot about that one.
I can't remember.
Helter Skelter.
Helter Skelter.
Okay, that was a good candidate, but I wasn't thinking of that one.
John F. Kennedy. I don't know.
I thought, for me anyway, I forgot Helter Skelter. That's a good choice. But my choice would be a book that came out in the 80s. It started the second wave of very popular true crime. Was the book Fatal Vision by Joe McGinnis about the Jeffrey McDonald case, the Green Beret doctor who murdered his wife and two kids.
Yeah. He was convicted, right?
He's been in jail for the last 40 years.
Yeah, right.
This book, A Wilderness of Error, The Trials of Jeffrey McDonald by Errol Morris, reopens the case. Errol Morris goes through the case. You know, this is a very long book. He's got all kinds of transcripts and writings and that sheds a lot of light on the term reliability. How reliable is all the evidence, all the eyewitnesses, the people at the trial? He goes back all 40, back to the original trial. I think he thinks Jeffrey McDonald might be innocent. I don't know if I didn't read it yet, but I read Fatal Vision years ago. It was a great book.
Who wrote that? Joe
McGinnis.
That's what I thought.
And to complicate things further, a book came out in the 90s by Janet Malcolm called The Journalist and the Murderer about the relationship between Joe McGinnis and Jeffrey McDonald during the trial. It came out that the author, Joe McGinnis, was in some ways duping him. That book caused a whole thing about the case. So now along comes, 20 more years later, this book, A Wilderness of Error by Errol Morris. I only skimmed it, but if you know the cases, if you know Fatal Vision, if you know the Janet Malcolm book, if you know how reliable or unreliable evidence can be and people's remembering, and there's been tons of stuff written about the McDonald case and Fatal Vision. So this book revisits it all, and I don't know if he says I think he really thinks he's innocent, or at least it should be reopened that there was tons of mistakes at the case, and then, like I say, compounding it, the relationship between McGinnis and McDonald it wasn't what Jeffrey McDonald thought it was. When if you ever read the Janet Malcolm book, it's fascinating, The Journalist and the Murderer. So, a new book about the Jeffrey McDonald case.
It must have been, The Fatal Vision must have been a very, very popular.
Oh, that book
For
came
me
out?
to read it, it must have, for me
Did
to
you read that book?
Yes,
yeah,
I
it came
did.
out in the 80s.
For me to have read it about, a bloody
Yeah, but I think-
massacre, it should have been, and I think it was really written well because for me to read
Well, it was a
and I
book.
did.
It became,
Joseph
it
McGinnis.
became a miniseries, but I think it really started a second way. That's when true crime, I became a librarian in the 80s. True crime books really took off in the 80s. That was like one of the big ones, but I'll have to grant you that Helter Skelter's up there too. So,
Why would I remember that? I don't know. My next book I am enjoying as well. This is not really new. We received it in May of 2012, but I just found it. It must have still been on, I don't know how I found it, come to think of it, if it really was on the new bookshelf or not. But I took the editorial liberty of calling it a new book. It's called Lives.
it's pretty new.
It's new enough. Lives of the Novelists, a history of fiction in 294 lives. Now, it's actually a history of fiction written in English in 294 lives. Now, this looks like and sounds like it should be a reference book, but it's written in a way that it's something that I have taken home and browsed through. I know I've read a lot of these authors, at least a little bit, and in my 30-odd years, I've got to say more, 40, 45, 50 years of reading good stuff, good literature, and it's fascinating to me to learn a little bit about the people behind it. And this author picks some fiction writers that maybe wouldn't be in a book of a reference book of the best novelists of all time. He's got in there Marilyn French. He's got in, let's see, didn't I make a list? Oh, I didn't make a list. A lot of people who you might not think should be in there, along with James Joyce, William Faulkner, Mark Twain. He's got V.C. Andrews, Louis L'Amour. I don't know who J.M. Barrie. Oh, J.M. Barrie.
Oh,
That's
Peter
okay.
Pan.
Right, Peter Pan and Stephen King. They're arranged in chronological order by birth date of the
It's not just Americans,
author.
is it?
No, written in English.
Okay.
In English, and it doesn't mean it's not translated. And it's billed as an idiosyncratic history of fiction in English. So each entry is only 1 to 4 pages, at the most 5 pages long. And one thing that makes me laugh is under each author's name is either a quote, a pithy quote from the writer that's being profiled, or a pithy quote from a piece of work of fiction that the author has written. And it pulls me right in. It talks about Mary Shelley, who wrote Frankenstein,
Correct.
right? And it says that her mother died in childbirth, and that may explain some of the severe bloody scenes in Frankenstein, things like that. But I just want to mention a few things. Here's something else. It says Anne Rand's at her funeral. Alongside the casket was a 6-foot-tall floral display in the shape of the dollar, the sacred dollar. Now, Anne Rand is all about survival of the fittest in the financial world, for sure. James Michener, under his name and dates of birth and death are, I am a damn good writer. It talks about how he didn't begin writing until age 40, which is interesting to me. James Baldwin, I'm only black because you think you're white. And so that's the kind of thing that really drew me in initially.
But the same person wrote all the essays.
Yes,
Okay.
and he writes. It's very lively, very entertaining. But there's also he also has he displays the resources he used at the end of each entry, and they're all, well-known biographical works for authors. And let's see, I think Arthur Conan Doyle, he wrote the Sherlock Holmes. Under his name, it says, "Holmes takes my mind from better things." So apparently he was very successful in his working life. I mean, he was alive and he had a lot of success. I didn't know that. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle.
Well, he was a medical doctor.
Yeah, I mean, I can't say I remembered that.
He never practiced, but he was very popular.
He never practiced.
I don't think
I'm
so.
not
I mean,
sure
I think
got that.
he practiced when he first started out, but then when he became a writer, he was very successful other than the Sherlock Holmes things, but that's what he's remembered for.
Yeah, right. And at the end, this author who I didn't mention, is John Sutherland. I should have said that. He's a professor of modern English literature at University College London. And at the end, he talks about the past and future of the novel. He says, in terms of today's fiction and the future, most fiction which is produced nowadays will never see a printed page, but will nonetheless be widely read. He says, put grandly, I have seen the future of the novel, and it's something you see, not read. He talks about how there's about 2 million novels in English in the North American copyright libraries, and he said, for the moment we can and should revel in the plenty which we, unlike all previous generations, enjoy. Long live the novel. He's talking about that.
But I can't help but saying, like I said to you earlier today before we started filming, a novel you're watching, that's called a movie.
It's called a movie, but it takes a lot longer than 2 hours to read.
All right, my book actually goes with that book. I wasn't going to talk about it, but it goes with this book. It's called My Ideal Bookshelf. The art is by Jane Mount, and it's edited by Thessaly LaForce. This is a book of very prominent people talking about what would be on their ideal bookshelf. People from all walks of life, artists, writers, architects, food writers, chefs, people in Hollywood, like all kinds of people. Judd Apatow, he makes a movie for the young kids, I think.
I don't know that name.
David Eggers, Alice Waters, Malcolm Gladwell, Michael Chabon, David Sedaris. You get the idea. But tons of people, James Patterson. But the great thing about this book, the most interesting thing is, all these people write a little thing about what would be on their ideal bookshelf, and the artist has drawn the books. You can sort of see. Whoops, hold on. I know I can see. And if you know these books, these drawings, even though they're drawn, if you know the books because you've been around them so long, I've been a librarian for 25 years. Before, I thought you were going to say in my 50 years of being a librarian, but I know you're not that old. These books they look just like the books on the shelf. They're drawn and they're very neat. Like here's, you probably can't see, but right in the middle of this is Catch-22, but that's just how it looks on the shelf. And they do the little penguin. There's a penguin book. You know how the penguin books look, the black and white. So the drawings are really cool.
What's fascinating to me is if the colors were they were placed.
The colors are the same?
No.
Oh.
To visually, if they're put together to.
So this is a combination of little essays, and it's and the little essays are very interesting. Why? And because of people from all walks of life, the books that they would have on their ideal bookshelf, but the drawings are so cool because, like I say, you probably can't see them. They look just like the book.
Now, see, those look different. There isn't any big red on the. I know what you mean, but I'm commenting on the colors and the patterns of the book.
Yeah,
the art itself.
Yes, they're very nice.
Sorry, I'm digressing.
So anyway, each of these people's ideal bookshelf has 10, 12 books. Some are a little longer, but it's very interesting. I don't know.
Is there a commonality? Is there a common title?
The one thing I found. No, you see a lot of the same books.
Anything surprising?
Yes, Francine Prose. Do you know her?
Nope. Spell her
Well,
last name.
I just happened to open to that page. Francine Prose has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 13 books. They're all by Anton Chekhov. And then she explains
Looks
why.
like she has Where the Wild Things Are.
Well, she has Where the Wild Things Are characters here, because she mentions that in here. But she mentions why she loves Chekhov. It's Anton Chekhov. So that's the only quirky thing I saw. I don't think anyone else had all books by the same author. But depending on what walk of life these people are in, very interesting. Like I say, if you know all these books, you would know most of these. So I've compiled my ideal bookshelf. I didn't draw it. I came up with 12 titles. These are books that, I won't put you on the spot and to have you name yours.
Oh, I could think of a few.
My ideal bookshelf, these are books that I really love. As I've read more than 12 books, but these are the books when I think of in the spirit of this book. So my ideal bookshelf would have on it Huck Finn, Tom Sawyer, The Riverside Shakespeare, Complete Stories of John Cheever, Henderson the Rain King by Saul Bellow, Watership Down, The Past Through Tomorrow, which is Robert A. Heinlein's complete collection of future history stories, The Complete Sherlock Holmes, Somerset Maugham's novel Razor's Edge, Travels with My Aunt by Graham Greene, The Centaur by John Updike, and last but not least, Tracy Kidder's book, Old Friends. So I can picture those books in the spirit of all these are.
All
so
right.
this is a really,
That's good.
if you're into books, and it's a really cool book. My ideal bookshelf. So what would be on yours? Can you name,
Well,
three or
I
four
would
quick?
just say, a couple of things I would just think that I could reread and reread and reread, but they certainly don't have the literary or scholarly cachet of yours.
Well,
I mean,
no,
Pride and Prejudice I could read over and over. War and Peace I would read over and over. The World According to Garp I could read over and over. That's all.
Well, I think the spirit of the thing is they may not be the books that had the most influence, but I would take it as books you really love, the books you could read over and over.
Right, that I would look at it. That because I would that's what I would ask what the premise was. Is are you stuck on an island, a deserted island, and you could only have a certain number of books, and what would you take, kind of thing.
I wasn't sure. That's how I read it.
That's how you read it.
I must admit I didn't read the beginning. So
well, I'll have to look.
I'm just looking at the pictures and the people.
That's a really good idea anyway for regular people to do. Okay, my next book is called Swoon, S-W-O-O-N, Great Seducers and Why Women Love Them by Betsy Priolo. She is an author and scholar in residence at New York University. She's taught cultural history. So apparently she's written a previous book about ladies' men, in effect. I'm trying to find out what the name of that is. Let's see if I can find this. Seductress. She wrote a book called Seductress, and this is women who ravished the world. She wrote that in 2003. So this is supposed to be, one of the reviewers calls this a fun, frothy compliment to cultural historians' Seductress. This is both fun and frothy, but it also, I learned a lot of history, and I learned a lot about literature, glancing through it as well. She talks about what the myth is of ladies' men and what attracts women to them, and what actually, and then she highlights historical figures who were considered ladies' men, and I mentioned a few of them to Joe. Some of them surprised me, I had no clue. And some literary characters as well, who were written as ladies' men as well. She talks about Casanova, of course, who seems to be the ultimate ladies' man in the true sense of the word. She talks about Lord Byron, Percy.
Oh, okay.
She talks about some people who are surprising to me. Carl Jung, the philosopher psychiatrist. Was he a psychiatrist?
Psychoanalyst.
He talks about Aldous Huxley. He wrote Brave
New World, yeah.
I had no clue. Sir Walter Raleigh, Prince Grigory Potemkin. That's what I was.
You have to mention who you were telling me.
What?
You have to mention who you were telling me before we started. Who's in there?
Oh, Ashton Kutcher. that was the funniest one. Franz Liszt, the piano player. Roald Dahl, the children's writer.
I read some things about him that were pretty kind of strange.
Yeah, Mick Jagger. Our current one's Warren Beatty. It says Jack London. I mean, I knew he was a great adventurer. David Niven and the good old Gerard Depardieu, who's been in the news
Well, David
lately.
Niven, of course, was very suave and sophisticated.
Yes, that would be right. But so it seems like a ridiculous premise for a serious book, but then, you know, as a cultural historian, I mean, it's very interesting. Okay. And I thought the title grabbed me, and you know, I was taken right into it.
Well, the subtitle I'm reading there, it says "Great Seducers and Why Women Love Them." Okay.
And she's dispelling the myth that the person has to be a great lover. Rather, the man has to be a great conversationalist and a great lover of being with women. She mentions that Ashton Kutcher, for example, was brought up in a house full of women, and he really learned to enjoy being with women, which is very different from our culture, at least the American culture today, where men like to be with men. It might be in a sports bar. He laughs. The real manly men, that's what I call the manly men, may not love to be with women. So Joe's over there laughing at me if you can't see him. But I think it's fascinating. Well, just as likely, just as like that, I'm fascinated that women want to read 50 Shades of Grey and all the sequels. So many women want to read it. So there's all sorts of contradictions in our culture. But this is fascinating. It's not as frothy as you might think it is.
You're making it sound, okay.
I know, I'm making it sound. But there's a lot of literary references, and she's obviously a scholar when you start reading this. But something different, Swoon,
okay. The
Great Seducers and Why Women Love Them. Am I making you uncomfortable,
No.
Joe?
All right, now, I think we have time to each do one more.
Okay.
I'm always amazed. I should tell people, I always bring up 8 or 9 books. We only get to 4 or 5 each, but that's okay. This is a new book by Harold Kushner, way back in the late 70s. You remember that book, When Bad Things Happen to Good People?
Yes, yes.
Well, he's still writing books. This is his latest book. It's a meditation. It's a journey through the book of Job. It's called The Book of Job, When Bad Things Happened to a Good Person.
Tell me about the Book of Job. I don't know what the
Book of Job is. It's probably one of the most famous books of the Old Testament.
I don't know. I know it's in the Testament.
It's I think, let me try to remember the premise. That Satan goes to God and wants to test something.
Of Job.
So he goes down to Job as a good man. He has a good life and everything, and God basically destroys his life, and to see if he would turn against God.
The patience
and he still
of Job.
and he still doesn't.
The patience
and then
of Job.
I think some of the book is a dialogue between God and Job, Satan and God, and then it ends with God explaining himself, sort of. I think. And this book is a journey through that. And the Book of Job is probably one of the most famous books in the Bible. One of the more literary. Many people through history have written on just the Book of Job. And Harold Kushner, a rabbi, he's a rabbi, and he's written many books. Everyone probably knows his name. So this is a journey through the Book of Job. It looked pretty interesting. I haven't read it, but I was skimming through it. He wrote his first book back in the late 70s. He had a son who died. He had something, I can't think of the name of it, when people age. He was 3 years old and he started aging like someone in their...
Yes.
And he died when he was 14. And that's what his first book came out of, When Bad Things Happen to Good People. So, and he's written many books since then. And this book got some really good reviews. And like I say, he takes you through the Book of Job and why do things, the first chapter is called Does Everything Happen for a Reason? I think the Book of Job asks those questions that we all ask, and humans have asked all through history, why do things happen?
I remember watching him on television, and it was very thought-provoking to me. He said that if you ask why did this happen to me in terms of bad things, he said we should also ask why these good things happen to me as well, and that was a real illuminating.
So I think he's trying to answer as unanswerable questions, like the Book of Job does, I think. So.
Fascinating. Okay, I'm going to squeeze in a couple of books.
All right.
This one is I Still Believe, Anita Hill. It's, oops, I got to take out all these pieces of paper I have. It's a book in commemorating the 20th anniversary of Anita Hill's testifying before the Senate confirmation hearings of Clarence Thomas, our Supreme Court Justice, 20 years ago. This book came out, well, they had a conference last spring, and I want to say last, but I meant 2011 because now it's 2013, commemorating, noting the 20th anniversary. And it's a variety of information in here. There's poems, there's a little play, very short play written. There's one essay by Anita Hill herself, who's kind of says, let's just keep moving forward. There are actually a section called Witnesses, or of other people who were there when it was happening. And so because I watched the hearings in 1991, I thought it would be interesting to see what is being said 20 years later. So obviously this is, I still believe Anita Hill. It tells the point of view, but it was a fascinating review of a very important historical moment in women's history, I would say. So I'm recommending this. I Still Believe, Anita Hill, edited by Amy Richards and Cynthia Greenberg. 3 generations discuss the legacies of speaking truth to power. And I want to mention this, the Best American Magazine writing of 2012.
We get that every year.
Yes, we get these every year. And
They're
this is
great.
today I brought up several books that are essays or short pieces. And I found this very easy to read because I could pick it up and put it down. In other words, it's like reading a magazine article. But these are the best of the best, and it covers all kinds of topics and magazines. It includes
it includes online magazines. Right?
Online
magazines.
That
collection every year is always really good.
Most of it's not. I think all but one of the best in this volume are nonfiction, and it covers a gamut. It talks about, there's a sports figure. They talk about, his last name is Dwayne Dedman, and how he overcame a mother who didn't want him to play basketball because she was a member of a particular religion, and how even at 18 he plowed forward and became a famous basketball player. There's also politics and war, and there's glamour and good housekeeping, I think, are mentioned in the best of the best. One is about good housekeeping, is about the drugs they use for maintaining bone density in women, and the other glamour article is about violence against women, how 4 women a day die, and most of them are from their significant others or dating partners. But it's a wide range of articles. The one winner is about the Church of Scientology, and the article is actually in here. It's like 70 pages, but these aren't real pages. They're
yeah, all those Best American things are always good every year.
Fascinating reading. So we have these years back.
We have that going back. That's a newer one.
This is 2012.
Best American essays go back to the 80s.
Oh, okay.
Best American magazine writings, probably 6 or 7 years old. I don't know.
Fascinating. We have Best American Science Fiction
we have all
Writing,
of them.
Best American
There's
Nonfiction
Best American
Writing.
Travel Writing, Best Sports.
Yeah.
We talked about them. Yeah.
So these are all in the 800s, and it's fantastic.
All right, I will end with this because I just want to say one quick thing. We are continuing our building our collection from the LA Theater Works, our audio books from the LA Theater Works. I've mentioned them before in many of our shows. I've been listening to them. They're great. A lot of classic plays. This is called the Noel Coward Collection. So if you like Noel Coward, I'm smiling because his plays to me are very funny.
Yes.
This is a collection of 6 Noel Coward plays with all, again, like I mentioned before, these are done before a live audience in Los Angeles, all famous actors. This is probably his most famous plays: Fallen Angels, Hay Fever, Private Lives, Designed for Living, Present Laughter, Blithe Spirit. I've listened to 3 of them so far. They are hilarious.
Do you listen to them while you're driving down the road
Yes.
and veer off the road?
Fallen Angels on here. The Fallen Angels. Annette Bening is in this. It's about these 2 couples. They live, their apartments are next door to each other or something. And this guy, they hear that this guy is moving in upstairs, who they both went out with before they were married. They're both in love with. So they get their husbands out and they carry on, and it's absolute riot.
So it's contemporary.
Well, no, these were written all.
But
wrote,
the actors are.
Oh, yeah,
the people reading it are people
yeah, and they're
we
done
know.
before a live audience. And Fallen Angels is so hilarious. It's a riot. And then I listened to Present Laughter, was very funny. Private Lives was funny, but it's got some. If you know the play Private Lives, it's got some bite to it, so that's good. I still got to listen to this.
So this is like listening to radio.
Yeah, and the great thing about these, if you don't have time to listen to a whole book, most of these LA Theater Work plays are under 2 hours at the most. I mean, some of these are 1 CD. I mean, you can do Private Lives in like an hour and a half or so. Maybe 70 or 80 minutes. Now it's different than seeing it. There's no action or movement, but they're unabridged, they're great. You know, we've been getting a lot of these. So here's 6 in 1. I feel like the sophisticated comedy of Noel Coward. These are very, I'm telling you, these are a riot. So that's it for this time, and we will see you next time.